The next surrounded claim is that a woman's body count doesn't matter.
All right, so you might be asking, what does a woman's body count have to do with anything? So when it comes to the manosphere movement, it's all about relationships. That's kind of one of the biggest core tenets of the movement, is how men interact with women and how relationships should proceed and then ultimately lead to marriage, and what does marriage look like. And there's so much more than just dating, relationships, and marriage, even though that's a foundational part of our society. If you're chasing after a relationship for worth and value, I would argue that that's a bad place to start anyway. I would say find your purpose in what you're good at, you're passionate about, and do it unto the Lord. And as you do said thing, the Lord may provide you with a partner to be your partner in that mission. Your mission shouldn't be dating and marriage per se. But in the conversation of dating, especially as it relates to Christians, what role does body count play in the dating process? If you're unfamiliar and you've lived under a rock, when someone says their body count, it's basically how many sexual partners have they had. Manosphere men harp on the fact that so many women have a high body count. And I think it's kind of ironic because I think a lot of these manosphere men, if they're anything like Myron Gaines or Andrew Tate, also probably have a high body count. So it's like, well, that's kind of hypocritical that you'd be upset that a woman that you're pursuing has a high body count, but you also have a high body count. That seems like unjust scales, but that's beside the point. So the conversation is a main talking point of manosphere men is that, a woman who has a high body count is like a used car. They've been run through so many times, so they're not as valuable. And Mark Manson is going to argue that that has no bearing on the value of someone and whether they're good dating material. And I would actually side with Mark Manson on this, with a caveat from a biblical perspective, is that, just because someone has multiple sexual partners doesn't mean they're damaged goods and they're not worth pursuing, because people can change. And that's what Mark Manson shared in his argument, is that, some women were wild in their college years, but then they realize that, this is not what all life's meant to be. So I'm going to settle down. I'm going to be more reserved, and they have a life change. And that transformation is important to notice. And I would double down on that transformation, that in Christian circles, when someone becomes a born again believer, they're leaving their old ways behind and turning, which is repentance, metanoia, 180-degree turn towards a life of righteousness. And once they do that, what's been done in the past is done, right? It's been covered by the blood of Christ, which is something that might be unfamiliar to those who aren't Christian. And they're a new person. They're they have a new identity. Doesn't mean they don't struggle with their past desires, but they are redeemed. They're God's workmanship, and they're no longer under condemnation, according to Romans 8:1. But with that being said, the caveat is sexual sin is a big deal. I think Mark Manson made it kind of trivial, like it's just recreational. But to us as Christians, sexual immorality is actually a really big deal, because the Bible talks about how sexual immorality is set apart from other sins, and that it actually damages you internally and not just others externally. It does a number on you. With that being said, doesn't mean if you've had past sexual experiences, that you're no good. But we just want to give caution, especially to the Christians out there, that, hey, if you're dabbling in sexual misconduct, you're sinning against God and yourself, right? Again, if you were not a Christian when you're committing sexual misconduct, and you had if you had no knowledge of what the Bible actually says, they can't be held liable to it until they start a relationship with the Lord. Let's say someone becomes a Christian and they're still acting a fool and having multiple sexual partners. We would say that we would come at that with toughness. Like, hey, you're a child of God. You know what's right and wrong. Why are you committing premarital sex, fornication, adultery, looking at pornography, whatever it may be? That's when we lay down the hammer. But again, if someone has not been a Christian and have no idea what the expectations are, then why would we put them under that same expectation? So that's kind of the gist about it. And on this conversation, I saw a post that Pastor JP Pokluda, if that's how you say his last name, shared the other day. He works with a lot of young adults. And I just want to go ahead and share with you what he says from a pastor's perspective. And there was a little bit of controversy in the comments concerning this post. He says, yesterday I posted about when to discuss your sexual past with someone you're dating, and the response was incredible. Some of you said it's none of their business. Others asked what could possibly come from the conversation. Then I saw this from Christian-centered dating, and here's why I think it matters. When you're dating someone who truly understands the gospel, confession isn't met with condemnation, but with grace. That's exactly how Jesus treated us, Romans 8:1, Ephesians 4:32. In fact, the conversation can become one of the clearest indicators of whether you're marrying someone who is emotionally mature, full of wisdom, and anchored in the gospel. Marriage isn't just two individuals sharing a home, it's becoming one flesh, Genesis 2:24 and Matthew 19:5-6. Your lives, your future, your struggles, and your stories become shared. That's one more reason God's design for saving sex from marriage is still undefeated. His commands aren't meant to restrict us; they're meant to protect us, right? That's so good. I'll preach. So if you're going to have this conversation, don't have it on the first date. That'd be awkward. Wait until there's genuine commitment and you're moving towards marriage. When you do, remember the 4 C's. Have the conversation when a commitment is there. Don't invite unnecessary vulnerability before trust has been established. Have the conversation in a calm way. This is an interrogation. It's an opportunity to know and love one another honestly. Nerves are okay, but be mindful of your tone. Have the conversation with clarity. Don't minimize, exaggerate, or leave room for surprises later. Again, nerves there are okay, but don't let them rob you of clarity. Have the conversation with a concrete heart, not because shame defines you, but because humility is beautiful and the gospel's already set you free. 1 John 1:9. Your past doesn't have to define your future, but your willingness to walk in honesty says a lot about the kind of spouse you're becoming. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And he has this post. The woman says, I'm not a virgin. The man says, that's okay. You're not going to make it weird. Why would I make it weird? Because every guy I've talked to has made it weird. Then they made it about them and not about you. Manosphere men. And it goes on and on and on. But the main point is, someone's sexual past, they can be redeemed from that. It's serious, right? Sexual sin is no joke, but God's grace is bigger than one's sexual past, right? The blood of Christ can cover a multitude of sins. And when Christ has forgiven someone, then you need to forgive them as well. Again, but you might be a virgin and you've waited patiently for marriage and you're wanting the other person to be virgin. That's fine. That could be your own prerogative. But to judge people based on their past, sinful past, is hypocritical because we all stumble in many ways. So as relates to the manosphere conversation, high body count doesn't matter if they've had clear transformation. If they haven't had clear transformation, that's a bigger issue. The body count isn't the main issue. It's the fact that they're still walking in sin. And it's not going to be a good relationship when you're walking with an unrepentant person because there's so many different issues in addition to sexual issues.